Settle in, my dear listener. Lower the lights, make sure you're warm and comfortable, tucked gently into your favorite corner of the night. This is your time now. No demands, no expectations. Just you, your breath, and a soft drift into stillness. You're listening to the Sleepy Scrolls, where stories from the past are told slowly and serenely, not just to teach you something new, but to help you let go of the day and sink into deep, restful sleep. Tonight, we explore a feeling so old it echoes through every era: jealousy, that restless ache, that green-eyed shadow. For as long as people have loved, they have envied. And for just as long, the world has found ways, sometimes strange, sometimes cruel, to punish it. We'll drift through ancient temples, medieval courts, Renaissance chambers, and candlelit drawing rooms, uncovering how jealousy was once judged and handled. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, gentle, immersive, and rooted in history, I'd be honored if you gave the video a like. And if you're not already part of our little nighttime library, go ahead and subscribe to the Sleepy Scrolls. There's always room for one more sleepy soul. Now, let your eyes grow heavy. Let your thoughts soften. We begin our journey back in time. The seeds of envy in ancient Mesopotamia. Let your breath slow. Let your body begin to melt into whatever warmth surrounds you, your bed, your blanket, the quiet of your room. Close your eyes if you wish, or leave them half-lidded, relaxed, and drowsy. You and I are going on a journey, not just across time, but through the more shadowed corners of the human heart, beginning in one of the most ancient and wondrous places the world has ever known, Mesopotamia. This land between rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, is often called the cradle of civilization, and rightly so. It was here, thousands upon thousands of years before our own day, that the earliest cities were formed, where scribes pressed soft clay with reeds to record the concerns of kings and merchants, and where the people looked to the sky not just for rain, but for meaning. Jealousy, as you may know from your own life, does not begin in adulthood. It is not something we are taught. It grows all on its own, like a vine coiled in the shadows. The Sumerians, who lived in this land around the 4th millennium before the Common Era, knew this well. They might not have named jealousy the way we do. They used words like nisik or kinatu, associated with anger, envy, or emotional disturbance, but they understood it intimately. It was a condition of being human, and sometimes it was treated like a sickness that needed to be purged or punished. In their myths, those long, dreamlike hymns that passed from priest to priest and were eventually scratched into stone, we find envy lurking in the hearts of gods as often as mortals. Consider the goddess Inanna, bright and terrible, whose passions surged with terrifying force. In the myth of Inanna and Ereshkigal, the goddess of heaven descends into the underworld ruled by her sister. Why? Some say to seize power, others suggest it was jealousy. Perhaps Inanna looked upon her sister's quiet dominion and felt a pang. The story ends in suffering, death, and eventual rebirth, as so many jealous acts do. To the people of Sumer and Akkad, emotions were divine tools, or perhaps divine tests. If you felt the pang of jealousy, it was not just yours. It was something the gods had placed in you to see what you would do. Would you lash out? Would you destroy? Or would you sacrifice and submit, and thereby please the divine? The laws that governed the people reflected this understanding. Take, for instance, the infamous Code of Hammurabi, carved in cold stone many centuries later by the Babylonian king of the same name. Though it is not a code about feelings, buried within its laws are reactions to the deeds that jealousy so often inspires: adultery, slander, false accusations, vengeful theft, emotional outbursts turned violent. These were not treated lightly. In the city of Babylon, a husband who accused his wife of infidelity might bring her before the elders. But if he had no proof, she would not be punished by the court. Rather, she would be thrown into the river, a trial by water. If she drowned, it meant she was guilty. If the gods saw fit to save her, she would return, dripping and shivering, but vindicated. Think of the cruelty of that. But also the faith. It was believed the divine would never let a lie triumph. And so jealousy was not judged by men, but by gods. A woman who acted on jealousy, say, by striking another or damaging property, could be flogged, fined, or returned to her family in disgrace. But punishment was often less public, more domestic. A jealous wife might be dismissed, a concubine displaced. In homes where love was complicated by social hierarchy, where a man might have several wives or lovers, envy could simmer into disaster. The Mesopotamians feared this. They wrote amulets to ward off jealousy, incantations, rituals to purify a house where envious spirits had taken root. There are tablets found in Nippur and Uruk in which the head of the household prays, "May no ill will dwell in this home. May no green-eyed shadow creep near." They believed that jealousy, like mold, could infest the very bricks of a building, and that it must be swept out with ceremony and faith. Among the wealthier classes, the consequences of jealousy were often tangled with honor. A man who believed his wife to be unfaithful might not seek justice only for emotional reasons, but because her infidelity cast a shadow over his lineage. Was the child truly his? Could he trust his own bloodline? In such cases, jealousy became intertwined with inheritance, legitimacy, and legacy. This elevated it to the level of politics. In contrast, within the temples, those echoing stone sanctuaries dedicated to gods like Enlil and Ishtar, jealousy was treated as something profane. The priestesses of Ishtar, known as Entum, were not merely religious functionaries. They were symbols of sacred power and sexual mystique. Their role was so respected and envied that some records suggest lesser wives of powerful men would spread rumors about them, accusing them of impurity or sorcery. Punishment for such accusations, if proven false, was severe. The accuser might be lashed, exiled, or forced to offer reparations in grain and silver. If proven true, the priestess might be stripped of her rank, her hair shorn as a mark of shame, and cast from the temple to live among commoners. These were not mere legal decisions. They were emotional reckonings, public dramas played out under the gaze of the divine. And still, there were ordinary people, farmers, potters, herders, whose jealousies went unrecorded. What of the man who watched his neighbor grow rich while his own field failed? What of the young wife whose husband took another woman into their home? Their pain is invisible to history, but we know it existed. Human hearts have not changed so much. Occasionally, we glimpse them, a scratched line on a household tablet. "He does not look at me as before. I saw him at the well with the weaver's girl." Or a quiet offering at the foot of a minor god's statue. "May she forget him. May his eyes return to me." These are the traces of ordinary jealousy, not punished by courts or priests, but by silence, by sleeplessness, by whispered curses in the dark. It's easy to judge the ancients for their rituals, their laws, their cruelty, but perhaps we too live with our own versions. Today, we might scroll through glowing screens and feel the same sting when we see a stranger succeed, or when someone we love turns their attention elsewhere. The emotion is ancient. Only the stage has changed. The Mesopotamians understood something we often forget, that jealousy is a fire, and it must be watched closely, not allowed to spread, not fed, and if punished, it must be punished gently, wisely, lest it consume more than the person who feels it. So let us leave these early cities now. Let the scent of their gardens, their cook fires, and their incense fade. Let the sound of reed flutes and temple chants drift into silence. And let your mind carry only one small truth from this place, that long, long ago, even under the stars of Sumer, the jealous heart beat just as it does now, full of longing, fear, and the need to be seen. Are you still with me? If you are, if your thoughts are still soft and awake, tell me, do you think jealousy should be punished at all? Or should it be healed, understood, forgiven? I'd love to read your thoughts, even if you write them with eyes half closed. Now, breathe deeply. Sink lower. In the next chapter, we drift into another ancient world, one ruled not just by kings, but by gods who weighed the soul itself against a feather, where the jealous heart could tip the scales and lead to eternal consequences. Egypt's divine justice and the heart's weight. Drift with me now to a land of golden dust and endless sunlight, where the horizon glows with the shimmer of heat, and the great Nile, the giver of life, moves as slowly and serenely as sleep itself. Here, in ancient Kemet, the land we now call Egypt, people lived by rhythms not so different from dreams. The rhythm of the river's flood and retreat, the rhythm of the sun's rising and setting, and the rhythm of the human heart, weighed not only by love or grief, but by something darker and more delicate, jealousy. To understand how jealousy was seen, and sometimes punished in ancient Egypt, we must step inside a different world entirely, a world where morality was not merely law, but cosmic alignment. The Egyptians believed in Ma'at, the divine order, balance, and harmony of all things. To live in accordance with Ma'at was to live justly, truthfully, peacefully. To betray it, even in thought, was to court chaos and jealousy. Jealousy was chaos. The emotion itself was not unnamed. The ancient Egyptian language had words like hsait, which could be translated as envy or ill-wishing. But what matters more than their vocabulary is their worldview. To feel jealous, to wish someone's fortune would diminish, or to resent the love they received, was not just unkind. It was an offense against the cosmic balance, and all offenses, sooner or later, found their way to the scales of judgment. But we must not leap there too quickly. Let us first linger among the living. Picture a village on the edge of the Nile, where mud brick homes bake quietly in the sun. Within one of them, a woman stirs lentils while watching her neighbor's door. That neighbor has a new necklace, perhaps a gift from her husband, or a new lover, or merely a stroke of fortune. The watcher's breath quickens, her stirring slows. She feels the familiar sting, that slow, burning envy that whispers, "Why not me?" She may speak no word of it, but in the eyes of her gods, her heart has already tilted. The Egyptians believed that such feelings, left to fester, would rot the soul. A jealous heart was a heavy one, and at the moment of death, weight mattered. According to their belief, after death, a person's soul would journey through the underworld, the Duat, to stand before Osiris, the god of the dead. There, a ritual would take place. The heart, the seat of consciousness and emotion, would be placed on one side of a great scale. On the other side, the feather of Ma'at, light as truth itself. If the heart was heavier, burdened by wrongdoing, by chaos, by unconfessed bitterness, it would fail the test, and the soul would be devoured by Ammit, the demoness with the head of a crocodile, the front legs of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Oblivion. No afterlife. No peace. To be forgotten. In this way, jealousy was punished not by courts or jails, but by fate itself. You might escape earthly judgment. You might wear your envy like a hidden bruise, but the gods were always watching. The scales would know. Still, there were more immediate consequences. In both royal courts and common homes, jealousy could bring misfortune, and not always just to the one who felt it. Wives in polygamous marriages sometimes vied for attention, for position, for favor. In the households of powerful men, one wife's jealousy of another might result in social humiliation, removal from the home, or even accusations of sorcery. A woman, accused of using spells to harm a rival's fertility, for instance, could be punished severely. She might be exiled, shaven, or imprisoned in the temple precincts, a sort of sacred isolation. Sorcery, particularly when it involved love or envy, was a serious matter. The Egyptians had hundreds of spells written on papyrus, etched onto bowls, or whispered in dark corners. Some were meant to attract affection. Others, more shadowy, were intended to disrupt another's love life. A jealous suitor might visit a temple scribe to obtain a spell that would cause a rival to fall ill or be cast from their lover's home. The spell itself might involve hair clippings, names written in honey, or even the burial of small figurines. It was dangerous business. If discovered, the envious petitioner might find themselves cursed in turn, not just by man, but by gods. And yet, the Egyptians were not cruel. Their society, for all its superstition, was deeply concerned with balance and restoration. Jealousy, like illness, could be treated. There were rituals to cleanse the heart, prayers to ease emotional unrest, and offerings that could be made to the gods in the hope of restoring harmony. A person who recognized jealousy in themselves might approach the local temple with an offering of incense or bread, admitting, in hushed tones, that their heart was out of alignment, that they wished another ill, even in silence. And for this, they sought guidance. In temples dedicated to Isis or Hathor, goddesses of love, motherhood, and healing, priests might prescribe rituals of renewal, bathe in sacred water, burn myrrh at sunset, write the name of the one you envy and bury it beneath an olive tree, not to curse them, but to let go, to release the poison from your soul and return to Ma'at. Royal households, too, were not immune. In the tales surrounding pharaohs and their queens, jealousy plays its quiet role. One famous story, preserved in fragments, tells of a lesser wife who plotted against the great queen, sending rumors through the palace that the queen had taken a lover. The pharaoh, in his fury, nearly dismissed the queen entirely, but divine dreams warned him otherwise. The queen, faithful and wise, was restored. The jealous wife, when found out, was banished to a remote estate and forbidden from ever appearing in court again. Her name was scratched from official records, a punishment perhaps worse than death in a society that valued remembrance as a path to immortality. Even the gods themselves were portrayed as subject to jealousy. Seth, brother of Osiris, famously envied his siblings' rule and favor. His jealousy turned to murder. He dismembered Osiris and scattered his body. Yet from this act, Isis brought forth life again. Their son, Horus, would one day defeat Seth, restoring Maat. The myth serves as warning and comfort. Jealousy may destroy, but it cannot win forever. Among the scrolls left behind in tombs, prayers for the dead, words to guide the soul, we find quiet admissions. I did not curse with envy. I did not steal another's joy. I did not stir conflict from resentment. These were confessions offered to the gods before judgment, but they also reveal how deeply the Egyptians understood their own hearts. They knew the quiet damage jealousy could do, and they sought peace with it, not just punishment, but purification. Perhaps that is what we must carry from this golden world. That jealousy is not merely a sin or a flaw, it is a weight, and if left unexamined, it grows heavy. But if named, if we admit it, tend to it, release it, it becomes lighter. We become lighter. And perhaps, in the stillness of our final hour, our hearts might float. Just enough. Let us rest here a while. In the cool stone shade of a temple courtyard, the sun is setting over the Nile, and papyrus boats drift gently past. The chants of priests echo from the sanctuaries, deep and slow. There is peace here, even for the jealous heart. Are you still with me? Still softly awake? If you are, I'd love to know, have you ever felt jealousy give way to understanding? If you feel like sharing, leave a comment, or simply think of someone you once envied, and let them go. In the next chapter, we will cross the Mediterranean, to the land of olive groves and marble columns, where philosophers debated passion and jealousy could lead to both poetry and punishment. Our journey takes us to Athens and the strange laws of love. Athens and the crime of passion. Let your breath come slowly now, in and out. Let the images of Egypt drift away like sand through your fingers. Let go of the Nile, the temples, the cool shade beneath the columns of Hathor's house. Because now, we cross the sea. The wind changes, the air grows crisp. The scent of salt and olive trees rises softly in the distance. You find yourself upon the rocky hills of ancient Greece, specifically in the heart of classical Athens, a city both brilliant and bruised, enlightened and deeply human. A place where logic danced with passion, and where jealousy, though cloaked in poetry and philosophy, still burned with quiet fire. Athens in its golden age, sometime in the 5th century before the Common Era, was a city alive with thought. The great thinkers walked its streets, Socrates with his endless questions, Plato always watching, always writing, and others who shaped the very language of reason. Yet these men and their society did not stand above emotion. They were immersed in it, and when it came to love and its darker twin, jealousy, they did not always know what to do. To begin, you must understand how the Greeks, particularly the Athenians, saw love. They did not imagine it as one thing, but many. Eros, passionate desire. Philia, the friendship of equals. Agape, the selfless love that gives. Storge, the love of family. Yet it was Eros, unpredictable, maddening, consuming, that most often stirred jealousy. And in Athens, love and law were not far apart. Imagine, if you will, a modest Athenian home, mud brick walls, tiled roof, a courtyard shaded with grapevines. A man returns home from the agora, the bustling city center. He finds his wife not alone. There is another man, perhaps young, perhaps reckless, perhaps foolish. The husband shouts. Neighbors gather, and soon a trial will begin. For under Athenian law, a man caught in the act of adultery with another's wife could be killed on the spot, and the killer, if he were the husband, would be justified. This was not murder. It was dike, justice. The law recognized jealousy not merely as an emotion, but as a righteous fury when one's household was dishonored. In fact, it was seen as a more honorable response than divorce or public shaming. For in the oikos, the Athenian household, a man's reputation was bound tightly to the chastity and loyalty of his wife. But before you think the law simple, listen closely. This same law did not extend equally in the other direction. A wife who discovered her husband's infidelity had no legal grounds to act violently. She could leave, yes, return to her father's home, but she could not strike, nor slay, nor sue. Why? Because men were permitted to sleep with concubines, hetairai, or slaves. A double standard, enshrined in law and custom. And so, for the Athenian woman, jealousy was not only dangerous, it was often silent. Yet it found its ways. In the tragedies of Euripides and Sophocles, we find women driven to the brink by jealousy. Medea, who kills her own children after her husband, Jason, takes another bride. Phaedra, whose tortured desire for her stepson leads to ruin. These plays were not mere entertainments. They were public explorations of how emotions, especially those silenced by society, could explode into catastrophe. Medea's story is especially telling. A foreign woman, betrayed, cast aside. Her jealousy curdles into rage, and while the audience may be horrified, they are also asked to understand, to see how a woman denied justice might take it for herself. The punishment she receives is not from Athens. She flees, untouched by law, but her legacy, her myth, is one of horror and warning. Among ordinary Athenians, jealousy often led to more mundane but no less painful outcomes: slander, gossip, the quiet ruin of reputations. A husband who suspected his wife of disloyalty might confine her, reduce her dowry, or return her to her father. A wife, jealous of a concubine, might spread rumors or withdraw entirely, living a shadowed life in her own home. There are inscriptions, now faded, on broken pottery shards, ostraka, where names were written for exile. Sometimes these names were those of lovers, or those accused of seducing the wives of citizens. Jealousy, when harnessed by the democratic machine, could even become a political weapon. Yet Athens also had its ironies. While passion could lead to blood, it could also be celebrated. Poets like Sappho, though not Athenian herself, wrote verses of desire and longing that touched on envy, the kind that aches quietly when one's beloved turns to another. In the Symposium, Plato explores the nature of love in dialogue, revealing that jealousy is part of the mortal experience, a proof of attachment, a side effect of the soul's yearning for union. Some philosophers argued that jealousy was weakness, a loss of self-control. The Stoics, in particular, believed that emotions such as envy, anger, and jealousy were disturbances of the soul, born from false judgments. To be jealous was to value externals, beauty, affection, attention, over virtue, and therefore it was a sign of imbalance. The wise man, they said, would feel no jealousy, for he would not attach his happiness to the actions of others. But how many Athenians were Stoics? In truth, for all their reason, the people of Athens were deeply passionate. They loved drama. They argued in the streets. They wept openly at funerals. They painted jealousy into their myths, etched it into their laws, and punished it with both sword and silence. And punishment in Athens was not always meted out by courts. Sometimes it came in subtler ways. A jealous lover might be rejected publicly. A citizen found guilty of corrupting another's household could be stripped of his rights, barred from assemblies, reduced to a kind of civic invisibility. Honor was everything in Athens, and jealousy, if exposed, could tarnish it beyond repair. But not all forms of jealousy were condemned. A man jealous of his wife's honor, who acted to preserve it, was often praised. A youth jealous of a rival's success in love might be the subject of sympathetic verse. There were acceptable jealousies, those that proved devotion, stirred courage, or protected family, and there were those that disrupted the city's fragile order. Perhaps the most curious case comes from the trial records of a man named Euphilitus, who stood before a jury of his peers and calmly explained why he had killed his wife's lover. He described how he had discovered the affair, how he had waited until he caught them together, and how he had acted, as the law allowed, in jealous justice. His speech is preserved by the orator Lysias, and in it jealousy becomes not rage, but righteousness, controlled, measured, justified. It is a glimpse into how Athens, for all its philosophy, still understood the pull of the heart. That jealousy, though dangerous, could also be noble. That passion, though perilous, was part of being fully human. So let us sit a while beneath the olive trees. The cicadas hum gently. The sky blushes with dusk, and somewhere in the distance a lyre begins to play. The people of Athens, flawed, brilliant, yearning, are not so different from us. Their jealousies wore togas instead of suits. Their heartbreaks spoke in hexameter rather than text. But the ache is the same. Are you still awake, my friend? If your mind still lingers in marble corridors and shadowed courtyards, tell me, do you think jealousy can ever be virtuous? Or is it always a thief of peace? Share your thoughts if you wish, or let them drift away on the warm Athenian breeze. Next, we shall walk the cobbled roads of an empire, built with iron and ruled by law, where jealousy could stir not just scandal, but statecraft. Prepare to enter the heart of ancient Rome. Rome's laws of love and vengeance. Close your eyes again, dear listener, or soften them until all that remains is shadow. Let go of Athens, with its flickering torches and echoing debates, and imagine the road changing beneath your feet. It is stone now, worn smooth by sandals and chariot wheels, laid out in long, straight lines beneath arches of astonishing ambition. You have entered Rome. The air here smells of olive oil and iron. 1,000 tongues shout across forums and taverns, and yet the order beneath it all is unmistakable. Rome was an empire of structure, of discipline, of law carved into the bones of its people. But beneath the marble, beneath the iron, always there was the pulse of something older, something primal, jealousy. In Rome, jealousy was not a thing to be shrugged off or hidden behind veils. It was public. It was dangerous. And sometimes it was codified. To understand how jealousy was punished in Rome, you must first understand how the Romans viewed love. Not with the haze of poetry, not as a divine madness, but as a matter of honor, property, and public standing. To love was to possess. To be betrayed was to be humiliated, and humiliation demanded response. Roman law had a specific term for certain acts committed in jealousy. Crimen adulterae, the crime of adultery. Now, adultery itself was not always a matter of passion. It was political, economic, a stain on the reputation of a family, a potential threat to inheritance. But jealousy was always there, breathing beneath the formal charges. And Rome, always obsessed with control, sought to contain it. In the early Republic, long before emperors ruled with gilded laurel crowns, a Roman husband who caught his wife with another man could, under certain conditions, kill both of them on the spot. This act was not only permitted, but sometimes expected. To allow the betrayal to pass unpunished was to appear weak, ignominious. In a society that prized virtue, or virtues, especially in men, such weakness could poison one's political career, one's social status, one's name. But the law was not reckless. By the time of the empire, particularly under Augustus, rules were clarified. The Lex Julia de Adulteriis Corricendis, passed at the close of the 1st century before the Common Era, made adultery a public crime. It could no longer be handled privately without risk. A man who killed his wife's lover might still face trial unless he followed strict guidelines. If he had caught them in flagrante delicto, in the very act, and if the lover was of low status, a freedman, for instance, then the killing might be excused. But if the lover were of noble birth, a senator or a knight, the jealous husband would be scrutinized more harshly. After all, status always softened the law. Women, however, were bound more tightly. A wife accused of adultery by her husband would be brought before a court. If found guilty, she could be exiled, not just from Rome, but to a barren island, stripped of dowry, citizenship, and dignity. A woman named Julia, the daughter of Augustus himself, was banished for her numerous affairs, her name etched in scandal that outlived her breath. And still, jealousy worked its way deeper. Roman poets, from Catullus to Ovid, wrote of it constantly. They called it madness, fire, poison, and God's cruelest jest. Catullus wrote of his lover Lesbia with wild contradiction, praising her beauty, cursing her deceit, begging for her affection even as he dreamt of her punishment. "I hate and I love," he writes. Why I do so, perhaps you ask. I do not know, but I feel it, and I am tortured. There is a quiet truth in that confession, that jealousy often punishes the one who feels it most. But in Rome, it can also punish others. Consider the case of Ignatius, a man recorded in satirical verse for smiling too much. The poet Juvenal implies that his brightness hid duplicity, that beneath his grin was the hunger of a seducer. Such men were not merely disliked, they were watched. A man known to woo married women might find himself the target of whispers, duels, or worse, the blade of a jealous husband's slave, hired to do what law could not. Among the lower classes, things were no less intense. Jealousy in the crowded insulae, apartment buildings packed with dozens of families, could lead to brawls, poisoning, or exile. The records of the Praefectus Urbi, the city prefect responsible for keeping peace, include complaints of love triangles turned violent, where broken bones and broken promises mingled in alleyways slick with wine and rage. But it was not always blood. Rome, with all its rigidity, also allowed for the slow burn of social ruin. A jealous rival might slander you in the Senate, accuse your lover of moral corruption, arrange for your name to be removed from guest lists. It was death by reputation, and in the empire, reputation could be everything. Yet not all jealous acts were punished. In some cases, they were rewarded. The Emperor Claudius, cuckolded openly by his wife Messalina, was urged by his advisers to have her executed. It was not just jealousy that motivated them, but shame that Rome laughed at an emperor who could not control his own wife. When Claudius finally ordered her death, it was less a punishment for infidelity, and more a restoration of dignity. The jealous whispers of courtiers had done their work. And what of Messalina herself? In a different time, perhaps she would have been pitied, or envied, or both. But in Rome, a woman who loved too freely was dangerous, and therefore dispensable. Still, some women turned jealousy to their favor. A tale survives, quiet and rarely told, of a matron who, discovering her husband's affair with a dancer, did not cry or rage. Instead, she invited the girl to dinner. She praised her beauty, dressed her in silks, and then arranged for her to be married off to a soldier bound for Britannia. The girl, flattered and deceived, disappeared from Rome. The husband, it is said, never found out what truly happened. The wife, clever and controlled, had punished her rival without spilling a drop of blood. That, too, was Roman justice. And still deeper, jealousy found its way into ritual. Romans believed in spirits, lares and penates, who guarded the home. But they also feared the invidia, the spirit of envy who could bring misfortune to the household. To ward her off, charms were hung above doors, shaped like hands or fig leaves. At festivals, such as Saturnalia, masks were worn to confuse evil spirits and envious eyes. Even emperors kept talismans, not against blades, but against the unseen. In this way, Rome acknowledged what its laws could not fix, that jealousy was not just a matter for courts, but for gods and ghosts. It lived in the air, in the gaze, in the longing. It needed more than punishment. It needed purification. And perhaps that is why, in the end, so many Roman philosophers turned inward. Seneca, the Stoic, warned against envy as a form of self-torture. Epictetus urged his students to desire only what could not be taken: virtue, wisdom, inner peace. For all their power, their armies, their monuments, the wisest Romans understood that the battle against jealousy was always fought within. So now, let the noise of the forum fade. Let the clamor of Senate debates, the hush of private villas, and the distant cries of the marketplace dissolve into the night. Lie still beneath the arch of the Roman sky, and to know this, even in the mightiest empire, the human heart remained fragile, prone to fear, to pride, to jealousy. Are you still awake? If your eyes are heavy, but your thoughts still wander through marble halls, tell me this. Do you think justice can ever truly cure jealousy? Or does it only soothe the wound for a while? I welcome your thoughts, or your silence. Next, we shall step into the hushed, torch-lit world of cathedrals and castles, where jealousy was a sin and yet punished with fire and chains. Prepare yourself for the Middle Ages. Medieval trials and the sin of jealousy. Settle in now. Let your shoulders soften. Let the rhythm of your breathing return to something slow and deep. The world we're about to enter is one of long shadows and hushed prayers. The flickering of a single candle might be the only light for hours. Outside, the winds are sharp, the trees bare. A church bell tolls far in the distance. You are in the Middle Ages. This was a world ruled not by emperors or philosophers, but by God, or rather by those who claimed to speak for him. In the minds of many, every thought, every action, every impulse of the heart was being watched. Not by a king or magistrate, but by a divine judge whose laws were eternal and whose punishments could reach beyond the grave. And, among the many sins listed in the sermons and manuscripts of the time, one crept quietly beneath them all: jealousy. In Latin, it was called invidia, a word that meant not only envy, but ill will, grudge, spite. It was not merely a feeling. It was a spiritual threat, a poison of the soul. And in the Christian doctrine of the day, it was ranked among the 7 deadly sins, those internal corruptions that could damn a soul if left unchecked. To feel jealousy, then, was to risk one's eternal salvation. But punishment in this world, that depended on who you were. For the poor and the common, jealous outbursts were often folded into more visible crimes: theft, assault, adultery. A woman who attacked a neighbor over a romantic rivalry might be tied to a public post, exposed to ridicule, and whipped. A man who injured a rival for wooing his beloved could be fined, imprisoned, or even made to kneel barefoot before the local church with a rope around his neck, a gesture of penance and humiliation. The body was punished for what the heart had dared to feel. But for those of higher status, noblemen, clergy, landowners, jealousy was a more insidious affair. Honor was everything, and jealousy, when inflamed, often led to something far more dangerous: vengeance. In the courts of medieval lords, duels were not uncommon. A jealous husband, suspecting another man of seduction or merely excessive admiration toward his wife, might challenge him to a duel with swords, daggers, or even blunt staffs. These were not acts of barbarism, but rituals of justice, sometimes even sanctioned by law. Trial by combat, they called it. God, they believed, would grant victory to the righteous. But what if the accused was innocent? Or what if jealousy had been mistaken for truth? The records of medieval France contain a haunting case. A knight who accused his wife's former suitor of secret meetings. The trial was accepted. They fought, armor glinting beneath the pale winter sun. The accused lost, and by law he was hanged for dishonoring another man's marriage. Years later, it was said, a servant confessed that the wife had remained faithful all along, but the dead do not return. And the knight? He was never tried. Jealousy, once acted upon, often left no room for undoing. But perhaps nowhere was jealousy more quietly dangerous than within the monastic world. Imagine a cloister: high stone walls, narrow windows, the scent of incense lingering in the damp air. Monks and nuns, removed from the world, were expected to renounce all desire, all attachment, and yet the heart does not always obey. Jealousy. Within convents and monasteries could take many forms: a novice favored by the abbot, a scribe praised too often, a friendship that excluded another. Though rarely spoken aloud, these emotions could fester. A monk might accuse another of heresy or impiety, motivated not by truth, but by envy. A nun might claim that her sister had received visions, when in truth she simply longed for attention herself. Punishment came not as fire or whip, but silence, isolation, a month of solitary prayer, meals taken alone, forbidden from speaking even a word. The soul was to be scoured clean through contemplation and shame, and, in the most extreme cases, excommunication, the removal of one's soul from the body of the church, and the belief that God's light no longer shone on you. Yet not all jealousy hid behind monastery walls. It lived vividly in village life, among peasants, tradesmen, and servants. Love triangles were common. A farmer's daughter might be promised to one man but admired by another. If jealousy turned to violence, a burned field, a broken cart, a poisoned dog. The village elders would meet beneath the old tree and pass judgment. Sometimes punishment was material, a fine paid in grain or labor. Other times it was symbolic, a procession in sackcloth, or the wearing of a heavy stone around the neck for days to represent the weight of sin. But jealousy could also be accused without proof, especially among women. In a world where midwives and herbalists were eyed with suspicion, a jealous neighbor might whisper, "She has herbs no good wife should use," or "Her milk dries the cows." And thus, the long and terrible shadow of witchcraft begins to fall. A woman who was too beautiful, too skilled, or simply too envied could find herself on trial, and jealousy, either her own or another's, might be the spark. The most chilling punishments came with the witch hunts. Though these reached their peak in later centuries, the seeds were planted here. A woman accused of using jealousy to harm another, a love spell, a death charm, might be stripped, searched for the devil's mark, and subjected to interrogation. Torture, justified by fear, would follow. And whether she confessed or not, the sentence could be the same: burning, in public, as both punishment and warning. A sin turned into spectacle, and all because someone loved, or wanted, or envied too much. Yet the church did not only punish, it offered mercy for those who confessed. Confession was the medieval mind's attempt to cleanse itself. A person burdened by jealousy might enter the dark wooden box of the confessional and whisper to the priest, "I have wished another harm. I have hated. I have envied." And the priest, in turn, would prescribe penance, prayers, fasting, acts of charity. The idea was not just to punish the jealous soul, but to save it. Jealousy, after all, was not merely between people. It was between the sinner and God, and if unrepented, it could be carried into the afterlife. Medieval art reflects this fear. In frescoes and stained glass, envy is often painted as a woman with snakes for hair, her eyes green, her heart being devoured by a beast. In the Divine Comedy, written by Dante toward the end of the medieval world, the envious are punished in purgatory by having their eyes sewn shut with wire, for they sinned by seeing what they should not have desired. And still, amid all this, love endured. In the poetry of courtly love, jealousy was acknowledged, even embraced. A knight who burned with longing for a noble lady might write of the pain he felt when she danced with another. His jealousy became part of the performance, the proof of his devotion, a suffering both desired and despised. But woe to the one who acted too boldly. A servant loved above his station, a squire who dared to kiss a married lady could be flogged, castrated, or hanged. And if the husband, lord of his manor, was powerful enough, no one would object. Jealousy, once ignited, was a force no priest could easily quench. So here we are, beneath the vaulted ceilings of cathedrals and the smoke of village fires, looking into a world where jealousy was sin and sin was everything. Where punishment came not only from kings or neighbors, but from within, a fear that one's own soul might be too heavy to rise. Are you still here, still drifting softly in the silence? If your eyes are still open, even just barely, tell me, which is more frightening, the jealous act or the judgment it brings? I would love to hear your thoughts, but only if your dreams haven't already taken you. And now, dear listener, we cross into brighter halls, gilded, fragrant, full of perfume and poetry, where love was art and jealousy a dangerous game. In our next chapter, we enter the Renaissance. The Renaissance, courtly love and cruel consequences. Breathe in and breathe out. Let the chill stone walls of the medieval world dissolve behind you. Let the echo of Gregorian chants and clanging iron fade like distant thunder. You are stepping now into a different light, one touched with gold, one warmed by art, softened by poetry, and stirred by silk and secrets. Welcome to the Renaissance. This was an age of rediscovery. The wisdom of Greece and Rome, once buried beneath centuries of dust and doctrine, returned to the world like a flame catching again on dry parchment. Painters dipped brushes into oils, the color of dusk and dawn. Sculptors carved gods into flesh, and poets, oh the poets, poured their longing, their despair, and their desire into lines that still make hearts ache centuries later. But even amid the beauty, jealousy walked. In fact, it thrived. For this was not merely a time of learning, but of appearances, of elegance and spectacle, of duels fought beneath balconies, and lovers' names whispered into lace-trimmed gloves. Love was elevated to art, and jealousy became a dangerous counterpoint, woven into every sonnet and dance. The idea of courtly love, born in the medieval courts of southern France and refined in Italy, Spain, and England, shaped the way people loved and suffered. It taught that true love was noble, secret, often forbidden, and always filled with yearning. A knight would pine for a lady beyond his reach. A poet would write for a muse who belonged to another. And the pain, especially the jealous pain, was not a flaw but a virtue. It meant your love was real. But the lines between poetry and life were easily crossed. And when jealousy stepped out of the verse and into the world, consequences followed. Let us begin in Florence, the heartbeat of the early Renaissance, the city of Dante, Botticelli, and the powerful Medici family. Beneath its domed churches and marble facades, jealousy played out like a slow, gilded tragedy. It is said that in the year 1478, during what came to be known as the Pazzi conspiracy, one of the motivations for betrayal was not just political, but personal. Resentment, rivalry, and envy among Florence's elite swirled together. Jealousy of influence, of wealth, of affection. And when Lorenzo de' Medici's brother was murdered during Mass, it was not only the Republic that trembled, but the private lives of those entwined in this subtle web of admiration and bitterness. For jealousy in the Renaissance was not confined to lovers. It reached into every relationship where beauty, power, or favor could be stolen or believed to be. In royal courts, it could be deadly. Consider the case of Anne Boleyn. Though her story is well known, it bears repeating in a soft whisper beneath the vaulted ceilings of time. Henry VIII, a king divided between power and passion, grew jealous not just of rivals, but of time itself. He envied youth, heirs, affection. When Anne failed to bear him a son, when her sharp tongue and glittering mind no longer held him rapt, jealousy darkened his gaze. She was accused of adultery with multiple men, even with her own brother, a charge both horrific and absurd. Was she guilty? Historians have long believed not, but the queen was executed nonetheless, beheaded in the Tower, her body laid to rest without ceremony. Henry remarried days later. The punishment for jealousy in this case was death, not of the one who felt it, but of the one it fell upon. In less royal circles, jealousy often led to duels. The rules were clear, the rituals elaborate. Two gentlemen, often adorned in embroidered coats and lace cuffs, would meet at dawn, swords drawn, seconds watching. A stolen glance, a flirtation at a masquerade, a too-long conversation in the garden. These were enough to spark bloodshed. Sometimes the duel was only ceremonial. First blood, a shallow cut, an apology. But other times, it ended with a body on the grass and a heart left burning. Punishment for such duels varied. In cities like Venice, where the law was strict, offenders might be jailed, fined, or even exiled. In France, during the reign of Louis XIII, dueling was technically forbidden, yet still practiced, especially among the nobility, where pride and jealousy were often mistaken for honor. And women? Women had fewer tools. A noblewoman who discovered her husband's infidelity could rarely confront him directly. But she could wield other weapons, rumors, alliances, strategic flirtation. She might encourage a suitor's attentions not from affection, but from vengeance. And if jealousy was exposed, if she was caught, the price could be ruin. In some households, a woman accused of adultery was sent to a convent, not for spiritual redemption, but for social silence. She would disappear behind stone walls, her name whispered only in cautionary tones. Yet, as ever, some turned their jealousy into art. In the poems of Petrarch, we read of Laura, his distant beloved, unreachable, worshipped. He praises her eyes, her hair, her walk. But beneath the admiration is the ache of jealousy, of watching her with another, of never possessing her love. His sonnets shimmer with longing, but also with quiet resentment. This paradox defined the Renaissance. To love was divine, to suffer was noble, to feel jealousy was to be human, but to act on it, that was another matter. One of the most telling examples comes from the plays of William Shakespeare, writing near the close of the Renaissance. In Othello, jealousy is no longer veiled. It roars. L'Amour of Venice, manipulated by whispers, allows his love for Desdemona to curdle into suspicion. "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy," says Iago. "It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on." And Othello, consumed by the lie, kills the woman he loves. Jealousy punished itself in this tragedy, and Shakespeare, with painful clarity, showed how easily a mind can be turned, how fast love can rot when fear and pride take root. The lesson was clear, but rarely heeded. In households across Europe, jealousy remained a private storm. It might result in bruises, in broken promises, in icy silences across candlelit tables. It might be buried beneath piety, or justified as masculine duty, but it never truly vanished. The more people adored love, exalted it, romanticized it, celebrated it in song, the more painful it became when threatened. And as marriages grew to include political contracts, family alliances, and economic arrangements, the emotional costs only deepened. A woman might find herself bound to a man she did not love, while her heart belonged elsewhere. A merchant's son might court a duke's daughter, only to be cast aside for lack of title. Jealousy was everywhere, and rarely acknowledged aloud. But perhaps most haunting were the punishments that left no mark. A lover turned cold, a name struck from letters, a patron withdrawing funds, a poem unwritten. In the Renaissance, punishment for jealousy was often social. Exile from the heart's favor, a quiet disappearance from salons and suppers. Not execution, but erasure. So now, as the harpsichord fades and the perfume of orange blossoms lingers in the corridors, let us remember that the Renaissance, for all its beauty, was not free of shadow. Jealousy wore silk and smiled at the ball. It signed letters in careful ink, and sometimes it drew a blade. Are you still awake? If your thoughts still flutter like moths to a candle, tell me this. Is it worse to be jealous, or to be the one envied? And have you ever felt both at once? Leave a thought if you wish, or drift gently now as we prepare to enter another empire, one scented with spice and mystery, guarded by silence, and filled with whispers of love and vengeance behind the veil. In the next chapter, we will step into the private chambers of the Ottoman world. Ottoman intrigues and the harem's whispered wrath. Let the flicker of candlelight settle softly behind your eyes. Let the echoes of lute strings and Renaissance halls grow quiet, like distant music lost in the wind. You are stepping now into another empire, one of domes and minarets, of rosewater and jasmine, of gold-threaded silks and silences so deep they could slice the air. We are in the heart of the Ottoman world, a world of splendor, a world of secrets. And here, jealousy did not shout, it whispered. It is easy to imagine the Ottoman Empire only in terms of conquest and architecture, sweeping armies, towering mosques, imperial decrees etched in flawless calligraphy. But within the walls of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, something far more delicate and far more dangerous was unfolding each day. The imperial harem. The very word, harem, conjures images, though many of them mistaken, shaped by romantic novels or foreign travelers' fantasies. In truth, the harem was not a place of pleasure. It was a place of power. And it was governed by a system more strict, more intricate, and more emotionally charged than most courts in the world. At its core, the harem was home to the women of the sultan's household, his mother, wives, concubines, sisters, daughters, and their servants. But this was no passive collection of beauties. It was a living web of ambition, hierarchy, alliances, and, inevitably, jealousy. For in the Ottoman court, the birth of a son could elevate a woman from concubine to queen mother. The love of the sultan could determine a family's fortunes for generations. And the envy between rivals, between women, between eunuchs, even between children, could shift the balance of an empire. Let us begin with a name. Hurrem Sultan. Born Alexandra in what is now Ukraine, she was captured by Crimean Tatars and sold into slavery. She entered the harem as a concubine and changed history. The Sultan, at the time, Suleiman the Magnificent, broke with centuries of Ottoman tradition by freeing and marrying her, publicly, scandalously. It was said he loved her not only for her beauty, but for her wit, her letters, her laughter. She bore him sons, she gained influence, and soon her rivals within the harem began to vanish. One, a powerful concubine named Mahidevran, had once borne Suleiman his first son Mustafa, but her influence waned as Hurrems grew. Rumors of jealousy swirled like smoke. One account, though likely embellished, tells of a physical altercation between the two, Mahidevran slapping Hurrem in the harem's courtyard. If true, the cost was great. Mahidevran lost favor, she was exiled, and eventually her son Mustafa was executed under suspicion of treason. Was it jealousy that began this chain of tragedy? Historians debate. But in the harem, as in so many corners of history, jealousy was not merely emotion. It was strategy. It was risk. And its punishments were as silent as they were final. Unlike in the courts of Europe, where betrayal might lead to public execution or exile, The harem's justice was quieter, but no less brutal. A concubine accused of seducing the sultan falsely, of casting spells, or of stirring conflict among the women might be confined to the cafes, the cage. A secluded section of the palace. No windows, no contact, only the sound of her own breath, for days, for months, sometimes for years. Other times she simply vanished. Poison was a frequent tool of punishment. A bowl of fruit, a cup of sherbet, a sprig of herbs tucked into rice. The death would seem natural, a fever, a fainting spell, nothing confirmed. And yet, everyone would know. She had reached too far. She had whispered to the wrong ears. She had made someone jealous, or had grown jealous herself. The eunuchs, men who served as guards and stewards within the harem, played an essential role in this ecosystem of jealousy. Though physically removed from romantic intrigue, they were emotionally entangled in it. Some favored one concubine over another. Some became messengers for secret liaisons or schemes. And if their loyalties were discovered, the consequences were swift: demotion, whipping, even strangulation with a silken cord. Jealousy also simmered between mothers and sons. Each son of the sultan was sent to govern a distant province when he came of age. This system, called the sankak, was designed to prepare them for rule and to keep them from plotting coups in the capital. But every mother feared the same truth. Only one son would become sultan. The others were threats. When a new sultan rose, it became customary, though not law, for his brothers to be executed. This practice, called fratricide, was seen as a necessary evil to prevent civil war. But to the mothers who had once shared meals in the same halls, who had smiled and curtsied to one another, the pain was unimaginable. And jealousy, once a game of glances and favors, became a matter of life and death. Punishment for jealous ambition among these mothers, the Veled sultans, was rarely formal, but it came nonetheless. A mother whose son failed to secure the throne might find herself stripped of titles, her quarters reduced, her staff dismissed. She might be placed under a kind of quiet arrest, still within the palace, but erased from its story. And yet, jealousy in the harem was not always punished. Sometimes it was rewarded. A woman who schemed skillfully, who removed a rival without noise, who gained the sultan's trust without scandal, might rise higher than anyone imagined. She might gain the ear of the vizier, influence imperial decisions, correspond with foreign rulers. Some even built mosques, schools, hospitals, their names etched in marble, their jealous rivals forgotten. Was this justice, or was it simply the way of power? Outside the palace, among ordinary women in Istanbul, jealousy had fewer paths. A wife whose husband took a second or third wife might feel helpless, her heartbreak masked by forced smiles. But sometimes she acted. There are court records of women who filed complaints against their husbands for favoritism, for failing to provide equal support to all wives, as Islamic law required. If proven, the husband could be fined or ordered to amend his behavior, but more often the complaint was ignored. Jealousy among wives was expected, even inevitable. Some women turned to folk remedies, amulets, spells. There are Ottoman grimoires, written in delicate Ottoman Turkish script, filled with charms to tie a man's heart, or to diminish the love of the rival. If caught, the punishment was public shaming, often in the marketplace. But many women continued to whisper these spells anyway, believing the pain of jealousy worse than any punishment the law could deliver. In poetry, jealousy lived freely. Ottoman poets, both men and women, wrote of longing and bitterness, of rivals stealing kisses, of sleepless nights. The language was flowery, full of metaphor. His eyes drink only her wine, or my soul grows pale beneath her moonlight. In these verses, jealousy was not condemned. It was romanticized. And perhaps that is the most curious thing. For all the punishments, the poisonings, the exiles, the silken nooses, jealousy remained part of the harem's rhythm. It was expected, even accepted, because in a world where love meant power and attention meant safety, who could afford not to be jealous? So let us rest now in the quiet courtyards of Topkapi, where fountains murmur secrets and roses bloom beneath carved stone screens. The hammam is warm. The air carries the scent of cloves and myrrh. The voices of women rise and fall like waves, and somewhere, unseen, jealousy lingers, not as an intruder, but as a familiar. Are you still with me? If your eyes are still open, even just barely, I wonder, do you believe jealousy ever leads to justice, or only to more silence? Share your thoughts if you wish, or keep them close, like secrets behind a veil. Next, we leave the domes and minarets behind. We sail across seas and centuries, to a land where guilt and fire walked hand in hand, and where jealousy was watched not by sultans or queens, but by preachers and neighbors. In the next chapter, we journey into early America. Puritan guilt and public shame. In Harem America, let the quiet hum of the distant Ottoman world fade like smoke in the breeze. Let your thoughts slip through time like a gentle tide, carrying us from the opulent palaces of sultans and queens to the stark, windswept shores of a new world. One built not by emperors or caliphs, but by pilgrims, Puritans, and settlers seeking refuge in a land they believed was holy. You are in early America now, in the heart of the 17th century, where the trees are tall, the winds cold, and the earth unforgiving. The colonies are young, brittle with ambition and fear, bound by the stern hand of religion and the relentless pursuit of piety. And in this world, jealousy was not merely an emotion. It was a test of one's soul. Imagine a small Puritan town in New England, rows of wooden houses with steep, gabled roofs. The streets are narrow, muddy in the rain, and the air thick with the scent of burning wood. There is no room for pretense here. Everything is visible, every action is watched, and every feeling is scrutinized. To be human in such a place was to live with guilt, to walk with suspicion. In the eyes of the community, every person was responsible not just for their actions, but for their thoughts. And jealousy? Jealousy was not only a personal flaw, it was a threat to the soul itself. It was a sin that must be confessed, examined, and, if necessary, punished. The Puritans, like their European counterparts, believed in the concept of original sin. Every soul was born flawed, stained by the fall of Adam and Eve, and the task of life was to work toward redemption through strict discipline, communal prayer, and the grace of God. Jealousy, in this context, was more than an emotional disturbance. It was a temptation, a manifestation of Satan's work within the heart. A jealous person was someone who had not yet conquered their desires, who had allowed envy to cloud their judgment. In the small towns of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, rumors of jealousy often became public. In a society where gossip spread like wildfire, the smallest hint of jealousy could spiral into something larger, more dangerous. A woman might hear of her neighbor's better harvest, or a man might suspect his wife of longing for another. such feelings were not private, but public, and when they erupted, they often resulted in whispers, accusations, and, if the jealous act was severe enough, punishment. Let us look at a particular case. A woman named Anne, whose jealousy over her neighbor's success had festered for months. She had heard the whispers of others, seen the glances exchanged, and when her neighbor's husband invited her to supper, Anne's heart grew heavy with suspicion. Perhaps there was more than just friendship in their eyes. Perhaps the man was paying her too much attention. That night, Anne whispered in the shadows, telling herself she had seen enough. The next morning, her husband was sick, a sudden fever, chills. And Anne? She fell ill too. But this wasn't just physical illness. There was something else beneath it, a sense of guilt, of betrayal. She had whispered her suspicions to others, and soon the town was talking about her. Had Anne's jealousy driven her to accuse the neighbor of witchcraft? Had she cursed the woman with her thoughts, with her envy? Were her troubles a punishment from God for allowing such a green-eyed shadow to enter her heart? In Puritan America, every action had its consequences. Anne's jealousy had tainted the air. It had corrupted her soul, and in this community, there were only two ways to deal with that kind of corruption: confession or punishment. Anne confessed. She sat before the minister and the elders of the town, her hands trembling, and admitted the thoughts she had been unable to control. The jealousy that had eaten at her from within, until it became not just a thought, but a desire for action. The town listened, and her punishment was swift, but it was not violent. Instead, it was public. She was made to stand in the center of the square on a Sunday, wearing a plain sackcloth, and confess her sin to the entire community. She had to speak aloud her envy, her discontent, in the way it had poisoned her heart. And that was enough. The town, witnessing her public penance, forgave her. The sin was acknowledged, and the guilt, the burden of it, was lifted. Anne was free to live among them again, though the stain of jealousy would forever mark her, not just in her own heart, but in the eyes of her neighbors. But what if Anne had not confessed? What if she had kept her jealousy hidden, allowed it to grow unchecked, and never admitted to it? The consequences could have been far worse. In this strict Puritan world, jealousy was often tied to witchcraft. To desire another's life, to wish for another's downfall, was seen as an act of witchery. And in the fevered atmosphere of the Salem witch trials, a whisper of jealousy could lead to far more than public shame. It could lead to execution. Take, for example, the case of Sarah Good, one of the first women accused of witchcraft in the infamous trials. Sarah, a poor woman, was not wealthy or well-liked in the village. She had few friends, and the jealousy of others toward her was palpable. When her name was spoken in hushed tones, it was often in connection to complaints about her behavior, her inability to fit the mold of the ideal Puritan woman. People suspected her of casting spells, of using her jealousy to harm others, even though no evidence of such acts existed. But jealousy in the Puritan mind was not about proof. It was about perception, and Sarah, unlike Anne, did not confess. She fought against the accusations, as any person might who felt unjustly accused. But in the fervor of the witch trials, that resistance only made her appear more guilty. Sarah Good was eventually executed for witchcraft, her life sacrificed to the purging fire of the community's collective guilt. Thus, in early America, Jealousy was not merely an emotion to be dealt with quietly. It was a public spectacle, a sin that demanded acknowledgement and often punishment. It was not enough to simply feel jealous. One had to confess it, to rid themselves of the sin before it could consume them. And those who failed to do so often found themselves caught in a web of accusation, guilt, and in the most extreme cases, death. But jealousy was not always punished so harshly. Sometimes it was handled quietly within the home. A wife might express her jealousy over her husband's wandering eye, and he would in turn offer some comfort, some reassurance. A jealous lover might seek counsel from a trusted friend who would offer them the same advice: to forgive, to forget, and to move forward. In these private moments, the guilt was less severe, the punishment less public, but the sin, the emotion, was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an outlet. For the Puritans, jealousy was a sign of a heart not aligned with God. It was a threat, not just to the community, but to the soul. And in a society where everything was tied to one's relationship with the divine, even the smallest of sins could unravel the very fabric of that relationship. So, let us rest now, beneath the heavy shadows of New England's forests, where the chill of the winter winds cuts through the trees. The village is silent, save for the sound of footsteps on snow. The guilt of jealousy lingers, both in the air and in the heart. And yet, there is also hope. For even the most stained soul could find redemption, if only they confessed. Are you still awake, still with me? If your thoughts are still clear, share with me this. Do you think jealousy is a sin, or is it simply a natural part of being human? And what do you think is the best way to deal with it? Next, we leave the puritanical colonies behind and move into an age of great restraint, the Victorian era, where jealousy, though often quiet, still simmered beneath the surface. Victorian repression and emotional discipline. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the weight of the past few centuries drift away like mist dissolving into the morning sun. Now, imagine yourself in a world of order, restraint, and quiet regulation. A world of high collars, tightly laced corsets, and decorous silence. You are in Victorian England, where every glance, every word, every gesture was measured, controlled, and often restrained. The air smells of freshly baked bread and coal smoke. The streets of London hum with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the hum of life just beyond the horizon. The houses are tall and narrow, their windows heavy with curtains, obscuring the lives within. Inside, families gather in drawing rooms filled with heavy furniture and delicate porcelain, and the air is thick with the tension of what is unspoken. This is a world where emotions are tightly bound, especially the emotions of love and jealousy. In the Victorian era, the ideal of proper conduct was ingrained in every aspect of society. The individual was taught to suppress their emotions, to present only the most controlled version of themselves to the world. The ideal man was stoic, strong, and unwavering, while the ideal woman was demure, reserved, and wholly dedicated to her family. Passion, desire, and jealousy were private matters, to be hidden, even from those closest to you. Jealousy, in this context, became a shameful emotion. To express jealousy was seen as a weakness, a failure of self-control. It was a loss of dignity, a lack of discipline. But beneath this rigid exterior, jealousy, like a silent current, flowed through the veins of society, threatening to break through the surface at the most unexpected moments. Consider the case of a Victorian gentleman, Charles. He was a man of high social standing, a banker with a family to uphold his name. He had a wife, Clara, who was as delicate and beautiful as any portrait in the drawing room. She was the model of Victorian femininity, poised, kind, and reserved. But one evening, Charles found himself staring at her through the haze of his own jealousy. Clara had begun to spend more time with a colleague from her husband's business circle, an attractive man named Edward. They had shared conversations over tea, shared laughter in the garden, and Charles could not ignore the quiet flutter of something unsettling deep in his chest. Charles, as a man of dignity, did not confront his wife. No, he would never show such weakness. Instead, he bottled it up, locking away his feelings as a proper Victorian man should. But the jealousy festered. It grew in the corners of his mind, in the spaces between his thoughts, gnawing at him when he lay in bed at night. He began to watch Clara more carefully, the way her eyes brightened when Edward was near, the way her hand lingered in his when they passed in the parlor. It was a quiet jealousy. There were no public outbursts, no dramatic confrontations, but there was a tension in the house. Clara, perhaps sensing her husband's discomfort, withdrew not out of guilt, but out of the recognition that something in her marriage had shifted. She, too, was bound by the same social code. She would never express jealousy, never make a scene. She would retreat, smile, and pretend that everything was fine. After all, in a world so bound by appearances, was it not easier to keep such things hidden? But this subtle dance between Charles and Clara, one of unspoken jealousy, of hidden fears, was not unique to them. It was the pattern of many Victorian marriages. The strict expectations placed on both men and women to control their emotions and desires meant that jealousy often manifested not in the explosive outbursts seen in earlier periods, but in quiet, insidious ways. A coldness that grew between a husband and wife, a glance that lingered too long at a neighbor, a silence that stretched too thin. These were the marks of jealousy in the Victorian world, where repression was as much a part of the fabric of life as the lace on a woman's dress. But what happened when jealousy could no longer be controlled? In some cases, it led to what would be considered the most shameful of actions: infidelity. A Victorian man or woman who had suppressed their jealousy might, in moments of overwhelming emotion, give in to it. It was not seen as a weakness, but as an act of rebellion against the strict confines of their emotions. And, while the public would never acknowledge this openly, the consequences of such actions were clear. If a woman was found to be unfaithful, if her jealousy had driven her into the arms of another, the consequences were harsh, often devastating. Public shaming could result in a loss of reputation. She might be ostracized, even from her own family. In extreme cases, she could be sent away to live in seclusion, away from the judgment of society, until her reputation had been sufficiently redeemed. The punishment was not just a matter of social ruin, but of personal moral failure. To allow jealousy to guide one's actions was to fail in the eyes of God and society. For men, the consequences were less severe, but still significant. A man like Charles, who had allowed his jealousy to take root, might never act on it publicly. He might never voice his suspicions to his wife, but the damage was still done. His marriage would be clouded by distrust, and his relationship with Clara, though outwardly intact, would forever be altered. he would be known in the social circles as a man whose honor had been undermined by his own insecurities, and while this would not ruin him, it would certainly diminish him in the eyes of others. In the world of Victorian society, jealousy was not only an emotional burden, but a moral one. It was something to be suppressed, controlled, and ultimately buried. But when it could no longer be hidden, it was punished not with physical violence, but with the silent weight of shame. The societal mechanisms of the time ensured that no one, not the jealous husband, nor the wronged wife, nor the man whose affection had been stolen, would ever be free of that burden. Even the very idea of marriage was shaped by jealousy in the Victorian world. Marriages were not simply the union of two souls, but of two families, two reputations. A woman's worth was often tied to her husband's ability to provide for her, to control her, and to maintain her honor. A man's worth, too, was shaped by his ability to control his emotions, to suppress the jealousy that could cloud his judgment. And in a world where reputation was everything, a jealous heart was as dangerous as any external enemy. Yet, despite the strictures, despite the repression, the human heart remained wild and unpredictable. Men and women, bound by the constraints of social expectations, could not entirely bury their desires, their fears, their jealousies. And so, like a faint, distant melody, jealousy continued to hum beneath the surface, always present, always threatening to wry. So now, let the shadows of the Victorian era fade. Let the rigid lines of corsets and cravats loosen, the weight of control melt away like ice in the sun. You are no longer in that world of constraint. The quiet is broken, the masks are lifted, and perhaps, even in that cold, measured world, jealousy was not so much a sin, but a symptom of something deeper, something both human and eternal. Are you still with me? If you are, share with me your thoughts. Do you believe that repressing emotions, especially jealousy, is truly a path to peace? Or does it only push those feelings deeper, to one day surface with greater force? Next, we will step away from the stifling propriety of Victorian society and move toward a modern world, one where jealousy takes on new forms, but the emotions remain the same. Modern echoes of old punishments. Let the world around you fade once more. Let the noise of centuries past settle into quietness as we step forward in time. From the cobbled streets of Victorian England to the grand halls of the Ottoman Empire, we have witnessed jealousy in its many forms. Now, we find ourselves in the present, a world shaped by technology, by globalization, by the rapid pace of life. Yet, despite all that has changed, jealousy remains, like a shadow cast across the bright lights of modernity. It is a feeling, a force, as old as time itself. But in this new world, the ways it is punished, both publicly and privately, have shifted. No longer do we see the literal dramatic punishments of earlier times, the executions, the exiles, the burning fires. But the toll is no less real. For jealousy, as we will see, continues to unravel lives, to shape relationships, and to weigh heavily on the hearts of those who cannot release it. Imagine, if you will, a busy street, a city street, perhaps New York, London, or any great metropolis. The buildings tower above, their glass windows reflecting the bright lights of billboards, the hurried pace of crowds moving in every direction. People are tethered to their phones, their lives compressed into tiny screens. Social media buzzes and hums, and it is here that modern jealousy thrives. In the past, Jealousy often existed within the confines of the home, the heart, or the court. It was an emotion too dangerous to express openly, too public to act on. But in today's world, jealousy is no longer just a private pain. It is something that can be broadcasted, shared, and dissected for all to see. The modern world has made jealousy a public commodity, one that is often displayed on social media platforms with likes, comments, and tags. But, just as in ancient times, the consequences of jealousy still ripple through the lives of those who experience it. Consider the case of Amelia and Greg, a young couple in the midst of the digital age. Amelia, though deeply in love with Greg, begins to feel a familiar discomfort. She notices that Greg frequently comments on the photos of other women who are more glamorous, more carefree, more liked. At first, Amelia dismisses it, but as time goes on, the discomfort grows. She finds herself scrolling through his social media profiles when he's not around, counting the number of likes on a particular photo, tracing the comments and feeling her heart tighten in jealousy. This is not a jealousy that can be quietly contained. It is a jealousy that exists within the virtual space, in a place where everything is visible and nothing is truly private. In the past, Amelia might have kept her suspicions hidden, buried in the privacy of her mind, where they could fester and grow. But now, with the proliferation of texting, tagging, and sharing, jealousy becomes something that cannot be so easily hidden. It becomes a conversation, an accusation, and sometimes a public spectacle. Amelia's jealousy grows until she can no longer contain it. One evening, she confronts Greg. "Why do you always comment on her photos? Why does she get so much attention from you?" The words, though spoken quietly, hang heavily between them. Greg is caught off guard. He defends himself, explaining that there is nothing serious between him and the woman. He reassures her, but the damage is done. The jealousy, once a whisper, is now a loud question that cannot be ignored. The result is not the dramatic scenes of old, no duels, no confrontations in the public square. But the punishment is real. The relationship begins to unravel. Trust is fractured, and even if the jealousy fades, the scars remain. The punishment of jealousy in the modern world is not public execution, but something far quieter. The erosion of intimacy. The quiet distancing of two people whose trust has been damaged. The modern punishment for jealousy is the slow dissolution of connection. And what of the digital age itself? The way we view jealousy today is often shaped by what we see on our phones. Social media, which has promised connection, has instead created a breeding ground for comparison. We scroll through the polished photos of others, their perfect vacations, their happy relationships, their flawless appearances. And we begin to feel something we cannot name: envy, longing, jealousy. But we cannot always tell the difference. The emotion becomes a blur, a phantom that lingers, often without reason. Studies have shown that social media fosters a kind of jealousy known as Facebook envy. The feeling that everyone else's life is more exciting, more fulfilling, and more loved than our own. We compare ourselves to others, and we do it in public, for everyone to see. It is not just an emotion anymore, it is a performance. The jealousy we feel today is not only internal, it is externalized, shared, often amplified by the very platforms that were meant to bring us closer together. This modern jealousy has its own kind of punishment. The endless scroll, the compulsive checking of updates, the comparing of lives, the self-inflicted hurt of seeing others in moments of joy. It is a slow, insidious erosion of our self-worth, and it leaves us questioning not just our relationships, but our entire lives. We find ourselves measuring our happiness against that of others. The punishment for jealousy today is not a physical one, but a psychological one. Self-doubt, insecurity, anxiety, and sometimes depression. But there is another, more insidious consequence of modern jealousy. It has found its way into the realm of relationships in ways that were once unthinkable. In a world where everything is connected, the modern lover's jealousy can turn into something much darker. Control. The line between concern and control can easily blur when one partner becomes obsessed with the other's online behavior. Tracking their texts, monitoring their social media, spying on their activities. Jealousy morphs from a simple emotion into a tool of manipulation, a form of control disguised as love. This kind of jealousy can punish not only the one who feels it, but the one who is its target. Relationships are twisted by possessiveness, and the once beautiful connection is poisoned by insecurity and fear. The punishment here is not physical, but emotional abuse, a slow, quiet destruction of what was once a healthy bond. So, in the modern world, we see jealousy not as an ancient emotion to be punished by execution or exile, but as an emotional currency that shapes our relationships in ways we cannot always control. The public nature of our feelings, the scrutiny of our every action, and the constant comparisons we make lead to consequences that are often internalized, felt in the quiet of our minds, the distance between two people, and the cracks that form in our self-esteem. As we rest here on the edge of this modern world, let us consider, is jealousy truly something we can escape? Or is it a constant companion, present in every era, every heart, hidden beneath layers of decorum, or amplified by the digital age? Are you still with me? If so, reflect with me for a moment. Do you believe jealousy can be a force for growth, or does it always lead to pain and destruction? Share your thoughts, if you wish, or let them drift quietly in the space between us. And so, our journey through the history of jealousy comes to an end. From ancient Mesopotamia to the modern world, we have witnessed how jealousy has been both a force and a punishment, a burden and a lesson. But in every era, in every heart, one thing remains constant: the human desire for connection, for love, and the pain that comes when those things are threatened.